Ali Lowe is the author of 2 best-selling thrillers, The Trivia Night and her latest book, The Running Club. And I do have to issue a warning about Ali's writing. It is addictive. So if you start reading one of her books, you are going to want to continue and possibly put aside everything else you're doing. Ali has also been a journalist for 20 years, writing for bridal magazines, parenting titles, websites and newspapers in London and then Australia after she moved to Sydney 14 years ago on a trip that was meant to last a year. And we're very happy to have her. Hello, Ali.
Hi, how are you? That bio, oh gosh, it's actually 17 years now. I need to
God.
update my bio. I'm really sorry, but yeah, 17 years ago. It's yeah, crazy.
Well, it's your books are set here, so you're definitely a local. And I'm going to start with the most recent, The Running Club, and ask you where the idea for it came from.
Well, it was during COVID, basically. I went down to the local park. We have a park at the end of our road, which is basically like a big kind of, playing field area with a concrete path all the way around it. And in COVID, I went down there with my son and just watched a group of runners just like pounding the pavement, looking actually quite miserable, which we all kind of did during COVID, right? But I just kept staring at them thinking, I wonder how they all know each other. They're all in the same outfit. And I was thinking, gosh, do they actually like one another? Or is the one at the back having a fling with the one in the middle? What's going on? And I just couldn't shake this idea. And I came back and I said to my husband, there's something about a group of runners that, there's a running club and there's a path that's not lit properly at night, and something's going to happen there, and I just couldn't shake it, and the idea sort of like continued from there.
Did you have that idea after the idea for the trivia night, or overlapping, or while you were working on the trivia night?
No, I'd written the trivia night by that point because I got my book deal for the trivia night at the beginning of COVID, so March 2020, and then this one came, just as during COVID, as I'd written and sent off the first one, and I was kind of planning, what am I going to do for the second, and it kind of appeared. So yeah, it was very good.
And from the start of your books, we are immediately hooked into the action, but also into the characters. And so I'd actually like to start with the characters rather than your pacing. Do you do a lot of development work on the characters before you begin writing?
I always start with a main character, but really it's the characters that kind of take on a life of their own, and then the story seems to follow them. So I always have a main, and then I have, I have my kind of 4 women, really. That's how I seem to have structured it so far. And then, and kind of develop the first one of those, and then the others become involved, and then the plot line comes from there. I mean, with the Running Club, I did have the character of Shelby, but she wasn't the one I started writing first, strangely. But I knew how she was going to progress as the book went. But really, that was all. I just sat down at my computer, and I kind of went for it, and the characters unfolded from there.
Do you find that as you're going through your drafting, you have to refine what you know about the characters earlier on? I guess like you discover things as you go on, or are they pretty much as they come to you at the start?
Absolutely, they become sort of fuller, and they develop kind of character quirks. And I'm not a planner, so I do start my stories with characters that are a certain way, and then they might change halfway through, and I have to go back and go, oh, actually, no, I'd said this about her, or I'd said that, I'd said her eyes were blue at the beginning, and then now she's very much a person with brown eyes, Yeah. So I'm just terrible at planning, basically, and that goes for characters and plot. So everything kind of develops, and I have to try and keep a score in my head of what I've said about people and what they're like. And I don't know, they do tend to sort of, it's like a snowball effect, really. They seem to become fuller as I get through the novel, and then I have to go back and embellish them a bit. But by the end, I do really feel like I know them, and some of them I like, some of them I don't. But as you would know yourself, when you say goodbye to them, you're sometimes quite bereft. So.
Yes, yeah. When the pages go off for the last time, it's a bit of a sad moment. But it's interesting you were saying, that you're terrible at planning, because I do think it's just, everyone does things differently. So planning suits some people, it doesn't suit other people. If you tried to make yourself plan, it wouldn't work. So therefore it's not the right thing for you. And clearly whatever you're doing is working.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think there is a lot of sort of stopping and starting. There is a lot of, losing 20,000 words here and there and rewriting. That's the problem with not planning. But I do kind of find that if I'm not planning, then I'm able to, if I've got a thriller and I've got a death. If I'm not planning, then I'm going along making every suspect, every character a credible suspect, and that kind of really helps. I think if I plan too much, I would find it really hard to get my red herrings in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Have you ever change to the villain is as you're writing? Like you thought it was going to be one person and then it turned out to be someone else.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I got to sort of 3/4 of the way through the running club, and I said to my husband, now, who's actually going to have done it? I just actually don't know. And I sort of gave him a list and I said, do you think it was this person? Do you think it was this person? Or do you think it was these people together? Or do you think it was her, him? You know, we went through everybody. And eventually we settled on, oh yes, now that's right. That's who done it. But yeah, no, I didn't have a clue. And then I kind of wrote the second half, you know, or the second, you know, the last third or whatever, knowing who it was and planning it out that way. But yeah, no, I didn't have a clue.
I guess that also keeps it interesting for you. It's like you're discovering it at the same time as the reader is.
Like a box of chocolates. What's going to happen next?
Yeah, exactly.
But it does mean that you know, I'm making it sound easy, but it's really not. And I think you know, I can make a lot of errors doing it this way. And like I said, I can lose a lot of words in the process. Whereas if I was a planner, I would probably actually, you know, the process would be probably a bit more streamlined.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but I'm a planner and I still lose a lot of words.
Okay.
It's
that
just
makes me feel a lot better.
Like tens of thousands of them have to go. But something else that you make look really easy, but I know it is not easy, is to hook the reader in from the start, because when we start your stories, we are right in it, and it almost like we've walked into the middle of a scene, which I guess we have, but you write it that way as well. So I'm wondering, in terms of your craft, whether you just instinctually write an opening scene as you see it and you don't touch it much, or is it actually something you've honed over drafting to get that finesse in the scene?
Well, with the trivia night, I did rewrite the first chapter about 1 million times. But then I put a prologue in, and I think that for my first 2 books, I've got a prologue in the third actually, but not in the fourth. So, but I've liked the prologue, you know, for the fact that it gives a bit of drama and it gives you a taste of what's going to happen. And I think that is always a really good hook. To get someone in. But the prologue for the running club, I think, was written later on in the piece. So I started out with the first chapter and then I went back to the prologue. And actually the same with the trivia night, because I wrote and rewrote that first chapter of the trivia night before I went on with the book, until my tutor on the course I was doing basically said, no, just write all the way through, just write through the book and don't worry about that because you will lose it. And I did ultimately end up losing it at the end. So, you know, I think writing that first scene is always, you know, it's pivotal, isn't it? But for me, it's never just straight on the page and you know, the way it ends up in the book. There's always a lot of rehashing of that one, especially because in some ways it's the most important.
Yeah, and it is so effective, as I said, to hook us right in, because as I mentioned, it's addictive, and it's addictive from the start because we just want to find out what happens. And it's the pacing's also great. And I'm wondering too if that's something that you go back and forth on, or if it's part of the rewriting process or whatever, you think it's too slow, it's too fast, and you change your mind about it, or if it is something where you tend to follow your instincts.
I think it is an instinctual thing for me with pacing, but I think that it really helps that I was a newspaper and magazine journalist. So, you know, in newspapers, you'd perhaps have a story that on, you know, if you had 5 hours to write, you'd spend 5,000 words on, but you don't. You have half an hour to write it. So you have to get the bones of the story into 600 words and you have to get it done in an hour. And I think that's kind of really helped me kind of almost to structure a story. But, you know, obviously novels are a lot longer, but I am a fan of paciness. I don't like too much of a, you know, too much waffle. So I do try and make it like that. I mean, sometimes I do have to slow myself down. And I know that in my edits, my editors come back sometimes and said, hold on, slow down. Can we have some description in here? Can we have a bit more description? Can we have a bit more characterization? Because I do tend to go like a kind of, you know, a rat up a drain pipe really, and try and get this fast pacey thing out. And I do need to slow down. But I do think in terms of, you know, having a pacey storyline, that my background has helped for sure.
Is there anything you had to unlearn from journalism? Because obviously, you know, the structure of the story, as you said, is great from journalism, but then the long arc of a novel. I'm wondering if between those forms you thought, okay, I can't do what I'm used to doing.
Well, I did a course to learn how to do it because, you know, I was really used to that kind of concise writing and did find it hard to be descriptive. So I did kind of have to learn to, you know, write a scene that was 600 words and a whole book that was 600. You know, I had to learn to kind of spread out my scenes, and yeah, I still do struggle with that. But is there anything else I had to unlearn? I suppose I had to learn characterization, because you don't do much of that in a, you know, and learn to, you're factual in newspapers, right? So you know, you don't use characterization so much, and you don't use your imagination. So those were things I had to kind of, you know, let go with, and, you know, and just, you know, go with the flow, basically.
Yeah. Were you reading quite a few thrillers before you started writing the trivia night?
Well, I've always read thrillers, so it's always been the genre that I love. So I've always read, I don't know, like my favorite books, Daphne du Maurier, Rebecca, you know, so I always loved Rebecca. I grew up reading Agatha Christie books, you know, Ruth Rendell, all this kind of stuff. That was one of my questions for later, isn't it? I've still yeah, I grew up with all those things. So writing in this genre was definitely something that was, you know, if I was ever going to write a book, it was going to be in this genre. And these are still the books I love to read. So I love reading, you know, B.M. Carroll books and Michael Robotham and Sally Hepworth, who's, you know, she's domestic noir, but she always has the thriller aspect. And, you know, I just love books like that. So it was always going to be the genre that was going to attract me, I guess.
Well, yes, I was going to ask a question about writing in. And look, I did it to you because I asked you what else you'd been reading. But I think it's you know, it's always the case that the best research is reading, and if writers want to write in a particular genre, the best thing they can do is read in that genre.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So but I do read in other genres. I do love, you know, I love Maggie O'Farrell. I've just read Pip Williams's second book. I've just read Homecoming by Kate Morton. You know, I do read in other genres, but if I want something, you know, that's pacey and, you know, addictive, and, you know, something's going to feed my addiction, you know, I will definitely pick up a crime thriller 9 times out of 10.
So was the trivia night your first ever novel manuscript?
Yeah, it was. So I did a course, and so I did the Faber writing a novel course, and that was over 6 months in 2 parts. And I just started writing, but I had the idea about 2 weeks before I started the course, and I wrote the book during the course, and in the sort of 6 months afterwards, yeah. And then it got picked up pretty much straight away by my agent in London, and then it was sold to Hodder about 12 weeks later, I think it was. So yeah, you know, it's a dream come true, and it's really naff to say that, isn't it? But it's been amazing.
Well, and also, you know, you had an apprenticeship really through all those years of journalism.
Yeah,
it was a writing apprenticeship and a storytelling apprenticeship. It was, yes, a different form of writing, but as you said, learning how to structure a story, and also interviewing people, which I imagine you did in the course of being a journalist, helps with characterization. Sorry, was it?
A lot of research, you know.
Yeah, all of that. So while the trivia night is your first novel, I do think all that came before takes the form of the apprenticeship.
Led me to this point.
Yes. And now that you have the trivia night picked up, that was picked up pretty quickly, but you've kept a cracking pace since, because Running Club came out a year later. As you mentioned, you have book 3 and book 4. So you're on a book a year trajectory, the sound of it. Was it a tricky adjustment though, between doing the doing the trivia night and thinking, I don't know if this will get published, I have time, to then turning around and having to do the Running Club pretty quickly?
Well, I started straight away, and when I got my book deal in 2020, I had 2 years before the trivia night came out. So it didn't come out till Feb 22. So I had 2 years to kind of write another book, and I did the second book, and then I was kind of already thinking about the third, and I kind of was tinkering around a bit. So I kind of had a couple of years to get a bit of a head start. But now I seem to have found myself in the situation where I'm kind of writing a new novel between August and kind of January, you know, knocking out the bare bones of it. And then sort of, you know, at the beginning of the new year, editing the one before, promoting the one that I'm promoting, and then going back and forth with edits, and then kind of almost having a bit of a clear 6-month run again from August to January to write. So it's kind of followed that kind of, trajectory at the moment, but who knows, it might change, but it seems to be working. I feel okay about it. It's been okay. But I do find that it's a bit of an escape from family life and kind of domestic life, sitting at the computer. I do absolutely love it, and it is my passion. So I've been very lucky that I'm able to do it, and I've got the time to do it.
When you're writing a new story but promoting the previous one, do you feel like you're almost changing gears in a manual car, going between one book and another?
Yeah, actually, when we were talking earlier and you were asking me about prologues, I was thinking, God, did the third one have a prologue? I'm just editing it at the moment, but I can't remember. And how did the running club start again? Yeah, so yeah, you know how it is, Sophie. It's kind of,
Yeah.
You're kind of juggling and you're thinking, I always get my names mixed up, but I've realized that I have a Luella, an Estella, and a Morella. For some reason, I love my Ella names. So God knows how I'm going to, when I'm promoting the next one, work out who I'm talking about. But anyway.
I can totally relate. I had a character's name in one manuscript, and it went the whole way through. And then I thought, pretty sure I had that name two novels ago. And I had that.
Did anyone pick you up on it? Did you have to change it?
I did. I just changed it, but no one remarked on it. It occurred to me after I'd been through, the first structural edit. And I thought, oh, okay, well, no one else has noticed, but now I know that I can't leave it.
You obviously really like that name, right?
It was my grandfather's name. I kept thinking, I'll name the character after my grandfather, and then anyway. Now, some writers have a standard writing process. They've got a magic mug or something like that. Do you have anything structured like that, or because of household or life, you're fitting it in when you can?
Well, I have this. This is my writing mascot. This is my cat. And he's always on my lap when I'm writing, because I always sit cross-legged on my chair and he's always there. So he's a bit of a lucky writing mascot. But I always have to have a coffee, always in the morning. And I'm a morning writer. I find it really hard to write in the evening. So I will have a mug of coffee. I will have the cat on my lap, and the kids will be dispatched to school, and I'll write as much as I can between 9 and 3. Break for lunch, but I'm kind of used to that newspaper environment where you're writing for 7 hours at a time, and you kind of I think that's given me quite a good concentration span, so I'm quite able to do those long stints. But then sometimes I'll get to the point where I've done 3 of those in a row and I'll be like, I can't do it anymore this week. I just can't. I'm brain dead. I'm fried. So I don't tend to get fried in small amounts of time, but after a few days I'm fried and I've had enough. So yeah, there's no kind of ritual to it really. It's just sit down, get as much as I can done, and have that mug of coffee. And
then yes, I think it's almost like a high tide mark rising. I think it was like, that's it.
Yeah,
the tide is way up. I can't do anymore.
Right. I'm going to the mall instead. I'm going to the gym. No. Yeah.
I suppose for you, writing really began when you were a journalist. So if I ask you for a tip for someone who's thinking of writing for the first time, I actually wonder whether it's a tip from when you began journalism rather than began writing fiction.
I would actually say that it would be do a writing course. And I'd say that to anyone who was, I'd say if you wanted to become a journalist, I would say get work experience, but it's harder to do that when you're wanting to write a book. So I'd say do a writing course, learn the craft, learn, how to write scenes, learn about character arcs, narrative arcs, description. It's definitely worth it. And you meet a lot of people in the course of doing something like that can help you along your way. So yeah, very useful.
And what's the best writing advice you've ever been given? It probably came in the course.
It was the piece of advice that I mentioned earlier on, right to the end. So if you are starting a novel, don't do what I did at the start of the trivia night, and that is write the first chapter 25,000 times, in different voices. Just get your story down, and then when you've got your story down, go back to the front and say, right, okay, now how would this character act? Because if you're like me and you don't know anything about your characters, really, when you start, they're going to be very different people at the end of the book anyway. So just get the bare bones of the story down and then go back and embellish, because then you've got a book to work with. That would be my number one tip. And yes, I learned that on the course.
Now, you did mention future books, so I'm wondering if there's anything you can tell us about book 3 at all.
Yes. So the book 3 is called The School Run. and it was inspired by me kind of doing high school applications for my son, and also the kind of admissions scandal in the US with you know, people fighting to get children into school. So it's basically about a group of women who are very keen for their sons to get into a private school, and there's a bit of competition between them to get them over the line, and the competition does ultimately turn deadly. So
Which, yeah, that school admission scandal was wild in a lot of ways, and so yes, great fodder. Well, great fodder for inspiration, because as far as we know, there were no deaths involved. But I can certainly see how your brain went to that.
Yeah. I think it's quite often news stories that kind of, you know, that sparked my imagination, but also things that I'm going through. So I had kids at primary school when I wrote the trivia night. You know, it was my local park that inspired the running club. I might add, there was no swinging involved at my local primary school when I wrote the trivia night. But yeah, and now, you know, it's high school application. So whatever the next one will be, we'll probably have some sort of loose, you know, link to where I'm at in my life or with my children, but we'll see.
So you obviously keep your eyes and ears open for ideas and inspiration. Are you someone who makes notes of things as you go, and you might have a whole collection of ideas and it's only the ones that bubble to the surface that get written?
I always send things to my iPhone, to my notes, basically. So if I'm reading a news story, I'll forward it to my notes, or an anecdote. My friend told me a really funny anecdote the other day, and I put it in my notes, and I thought, right, I'm definitely going to use that. So I do, and names, everything goes into my notes. But at the moment, I'm really, you know, I'm going through all my notes and trying to work out what I might start book 5 on. So, and I don't have a clue. So if anyone's got any ideas, give me a shout.
I'm sure you all have ideas based on what you said. Now, because this is a podcast covering books and music, I'm wondering if you have a favorite musical artist or song or album or anything you'd like to share with us.
Well, I kind of flip and flop with music, so I'll listen to anything, and it's usually something the kids have got on. So the kids are listening to Sam Smith in the car at the moment, so I'm quite liking Sam Smith. But I also took my daughter to see Ed Sheeran when he was in Sydney, and I absolutely loved it and listened to Ed for about, you know, 6 weeks afterwards. So I'd have to say Ed at the moment, but I will listen to anything. You know, if I need a warble, it might even be Whitney Houston, you know, but it can be anything. But at the moment, I'll say Ed.
Well, I think that's a very good choice. And Ali, I can't wait to read book 3. So I hope that's coming up at some point very soon. And also book 4 and book 5. Thank you so much for your time talking about writing.
Oh, thanks for having me.